and a very warm welcome to the big debate, Freebies versus Welfare. I am Shweta Punj. The Supreme Court on Wednesday was told that the promise of pre-election freebies by political parties is a corrupt practice and bribe under the Representation of the People Act. With state elections underway, every political party has done an upmanship on announcing freebies or welfare measures. Take the recent cabinet decision to increase the cooking gas subsidy for beneficiaries of the Ujjwala scheme by 100 rupees per cylinder. It comes at a time when crude oil prices are on a boil. Then the big question is it a freebie or is it a welfare measure? Or if the promise of free electricity up to 100 units for families in Rajasthan or e-scooters given away to meritorious female students, do they qualify as freebies or do they qualify as welfare? While the Supreme Court is debating this, clearly there is no legal definition. Parties are positioning their plans as welfare for the needy, and those who are criticizing this move are being dubbed or being snubbed as elite. Well, to understand the fiscal and societal implications of such announcements, I have with me Amitabh Dubey, in charge of research and monitoring at Aicc Media, and Rajat Sethi, public policy analyst, former advisor to the CM of Manipur. Thank you very much, Amitabh and Rajat, for joining us on Moneycontrol. Of course, a very, very contentious topic. We have key state elections going on underway right now. Rajasthan goes to polls tomorrow. Let me come across to you, Amitabh. Free laptops, free tablets, free insurance cover of 15 lakh rupees for losses due to natural disaster, as in free smartphones. There is just so much in the offing in Rajasthan. What is the whole thought process behind offering these 7 guarantees?
These guarantees don't come out of thin air. There is a process, and there's a lot of demand amongst voters and citizens. You have to understand the context. Now, freebies or welfare measures have always been there in politics in many countries over time, but there seems to be an intensification of demands for what you termed freebies. And the context is that the economy is underperforming. The GDP growth rate under the Modi government has been lower than it was under the UPA on a per capita basis. You have highly unequal growth going on. If you look at the statistics, sales of scooters and two-wheelers are down. Sales of luxury cars are up very strongly. This is what economists call a K-shaped recovery. And there are estimates that the proportion of national income going to the top 1% has gone up from 20% in 2014 to 25% in 2022. So there's clearly a huge phenomenon of unequal growth. And so there are demands coming from people for this. So political parties are responding to this. Of course, you have to strike a balance between investment and consumption from a budgetary point of view. But this is a response to demands from the people. In Madhya Pradesh, I'll give you one example. I met a woman in a slum who told me that in Bhopal, that she pays 2,000 rupees a month in electricity bills. Now, her household probably earns 15 to 20,000 rupees a month at most. So you can see what big proportion of her bill this is. So these are real issues. These are not issues that political parties are inventing.
Right, Amitabh, fair enough. You're saying that there has been a slowdown and what we are witnessing is a K-shaped recovery. Having said that, and I'll come across to you, Rajat, for this. Having said that, do you qualify giving out a smartphone as a necessity? Is that something that, the electorate or the voters are demanding and the leadership is going to be handing it out? Does that qualify as a bribe, or is that something that's necessary for survival? Rajat, let me come across to you on this. The central government has also announced a whole host of subsidies in the run-up to elections, and they are all across. It's a national rollout that we're talking about. Is this, and the RBI has also raised a red flag on state finances for this. Are these elections setting a bad precedent when it comes to not being fiscally prudent and as Amitabh was talking about, giving the people what they want, even if the cost of that is very high?
Well, Amitabh ji should heed advice from none other than his own Prime Minister, Manmohan Singh, when he said that पैसे पेड़ पे नहीं लगते हैं. Clearly, he had a deep understanding of public policy and public finances. Anywhere you go across the world, whenever political parties or politicians make any promise, they have to balance the budget. So budget balancing is an important thing. You need to tell the electorate as to how you're going to finance each of your promises. Pick up Chhattisgarh. Chhattisgarh state, Bhupesh Baghel went on a spree of announcing one freebie after another. And the entire cost of those freebies is going to be rupees 40,000 crores annually. How does the state of Chhattisgarh pay for those? That's just a small example. Look at what happened in Karnataka. You go out, your entire state budget and the deficit that it was running into has been significantly breached just because of a reckless amount of freebies which have been given in. Now, every state government, they have to account for what are the statutory limits on how much spending they can do. Within that bracket of spending, they need to come up with promises and tell the voters as to how they're going to finance those freebies, be it the central government or the state government. No political party across all hues and color should not have a free run by literally bribing voters. You know what happens? I'll tell you examples that I just visited Telangana state. Congress party, they started off, and then the BRS competitively came in. They are literally guarantee cards. Like, cards are printed out with a serial number, and data is being asked that if you fill in those data and just keep this card safely with you, if you keep this card, we are going to give you 2,000 rupees every month into your account. But if you lose this card and if you do not vote for Congress party, you will not get it. This is exactly a bribe by any definition of bribery that you can come up with. This is what Supreme Court should clamp down upon. This should not be allowed. This is against model code. You can make broad-based promises, but there should be a timeline around it, around which you can make that, and you have to come out with justification on state finances as to how you're going to fund it. If all of these things are in place,
sure.
Welfareism is not a problem at all. Welfareism, which is responsible, which is fiscally responsible, is the need of the hour.
Right. Let me come across to you, Amitabh, on this. As Rajat also pointed out, clearly there needs to be fiscal space that should be made available for this. And Ashima Goyal, from the MPC member of the RBI, has also said that political parties need to come out and explain how are they going to finance these freebies. I want to get a sense from you on talking about the 7 guarantees that Rajasthan government is offering at the moment. Is there an estimate on how much would that cost the exchequer? Is there some sort of provisioning that's been made for all the laptops and e-scooters that are being promised currently?
Rajat conveniently picked the example of Telangana when highlighting these guarantees. If you look at the promises of the BJP in Chhattisgarh, Madhya Pradesh, Telangana, and Rajasthan, they are mirror images of some of the promises that other parties have made. They're promising subsidized gas, they're promising payments, welfare payments to women, in some cases married women, to agricultural workers, 10,000 a month. In many of
So
these
Amitabh,
states.
I don't want to get into who's offering what.
Yeah,
we know it's been widely reported. Can you please answer my question?
Yeah. So, he gave the example of Chhattisgarh. Now, I'm familiar a little more with the Karnataka example, where we had a similar set of guarantees, which were estimated to cost about 50,000 crore rupees. If you look at the budget of Karnataka, the fiscal deficit projected for this year is actually lower than last year. So, as a government, your job is to figure out what your spending priorities are and how you're going to find the money for those programs. So I completely agree that governments should have a fiscally responsible stance, but they need to generate the resources either by switching money from other heads or by generating additional resources. And certainly in the case of Karnataka, they've made big spending commitments, but they've actually found the ways to fund them.
Right. So, let me give you Rajasthan's example. Rajasthan continues to be in a very fiscally perilous situation. And according to an RBI paper, Rajasthan was singled out for its poor expenditure quality, with 90% of its spending going into servicing debt burdens and just financing freebies or whatever you might call it. Now, I want to get both of you in, because I don't want to get into a debate that, okay, this party versus that. I want both of you to, put on your public policy hat on and help us understand what would be qualified as a freebie versus a welfare measure? Because currently what we are seeing is a big jumble. Now, one would think that with oil prices going up, an LPG subsidy could be qualified in the welfare bracket, could be. But does a tablet or does a computer or does an iPad, for instance, does that qualify as welfare? Rajat, let me pose this question to you first.
I think it's a well-intentioned question, and I think political parties, more than political parties, the regulators of our of various governments should come in together and say that there is a basket of consumption which is reflective of the daily needs of an individual to live not just a healthy life, but also live a well-rounded, nutritious life, which addresses some of the very fundamental diversified indices of growth. If those consumption baskets can be looked into and made some kind of an indexing is done as to how much amount of money that needs to go into each of these segments, perhaps you can come to something which can closely resemble what welfareism should look like. I mean, you can then say that, okay, even if a cash transfer is done, which is the whole premise of what a basic income philosophy entails, you can say that, yes, I'm going to do direct cash transfers every household to the tune of 3,000, 4,000 rupees. And this is going to cover the cost of these consumption items from the consumption basket. And that pretty much takes care of empowering an individual to stand up on his feet and ensure that they are active participants of the economy. As long as this is done, this is where welfareism stops. Beyond that is a freebie culture.
Sure. Amitabh, let me come across to you. Congress party did this in Karnataka, you're doing this in Rajasthan. Is there a thinking in the Congress party on where does one draw the line between welfareism and promoting a freebie culture? You don't want people to just be so dependent on the government to provide them with everything that they do not come out to be self-sustaining and hardworking individuals.
I think if you look at some of the so-called freebies, there is a logic to them. As Rajat just said, he actually laid out a reasonable argument for cash transfers. And some of these so-called freebies are in fact cash transferred to women. I think free bus service, there's been a lot of research on how free transportation is empowering to women, how it allows them to take part in society, particularly in India, where there are many barriers to women's participation. If you look at the gas cylinder subsidy, we had a whole the hard selling of the Ujjwala Yojana with the argument that it would take women away from smoky chulas. But ever since gas cylinders have become unaffordable for many women, they're going back to smoky chulas, which has a public health element. So I think many of these are actually well thought through. And, Manrega is an example that it was referred to as a freebie back when it started, but it led to huge welfare benefits. It was quite self-targeting. It led to the creation of sustainable rural assets, water preservation, and so on and so forth. So I think a lot of these programs do have some thinking. Now, is a tablet or a phone defensible? Both arguments are fine. Of course, I would say that a phone today is more important than it would have been 10 years ago, 15 years ago. Particularly when you have things like digitization that the government is propounding, then you need to let people take part in those services. And from that point of view, you can defend a telephone. So I don't want to say that everything is defensible, but I think there is a lot of thinking that goes into many of these promises.
Sure. Let me come across to you, Rajat. Rajat, you worked with the Chief Minister of Manipur. Now, Manipur also saw a whole host of freebies that were given out to students. There was a train that was promised, a 4-4 train that was promised in the BJP manifesto. From a political point of view, once these freebies are handed out, can they be rolled back? Because it's almost like you give a candy to a child and then you want it back, telling them that, okay, this is not good for your teeth, it's not good for your health, and now you're done with it. Is that possible? Politically, how disastrous, what are the consequences for this?
First of all, I don't know what manifesto you're talking about and what whole promise you're talking about over there. But in general, I think...
it was a 2022 manifesto by the BJP.
What exactly was that?
A 2022 manifesto by the BJP.
What exactly was there? What's the line item?
It spoke about... Sorry?
What was the line item that you're talking about?
What was the line item I'm talking about? Just one second. I'll just pull it up for you. It spoke about free scooties and laptops for students.
Right. So laptops for students, I think there were certain conditions around which laptop was to be given. As far as I remember, these were college graduates who have secured a specific percentage marks. That is where I think the promise was made. Again, I'm not defending, and I said even at the outset that parties of all hue and color, they suffer with this ailment of competitive freebies. As I said, if something which would fall ideally under the welfareism category should essentially look into the last man standing and see that whether that element of freebie or a welfare item is being provided to him, does it materially change his life? And if it does, that's exactly why the governments are chosen and elected for. That is for redistribution and the most effective form of redistribution of wealth. That's what they do. And there has to be an application of mind. I mean, you'll have to see that how many people, what's the penetration of digital tools like software, like these hardware items, etc. And if it is not, you come in, you step in. But also keep it in mind.
Right. So can you roll them back, Rajat? Is there an expiry date to it?
I'll give you one example.
Yeah.
Pick Chhattisgarh. I was just, really startled when just 2 days before the election, Bhupesh Baghel suddenly said, I'm going to transfer 15,000 rupees to every woman. Now, how, election manifesto was promised earlier, but then, once he saw that, the election might not be going in his favor, suddenly 2 days before he comes out with this thing and says, I'm going to give 15,000 rupees, and it was flashed on all newspapers. This is literally bribing. And this is where I have a problem. You figure out, you present data that yes, see, women require cash transfers to this tune to be able to, sustain their lifestyle, life, and like they want to be active participants of the economy. Well and good. But you have to think it through. You have to present data. You've been there in power for the past 5 years. What are the deficits? Where have women labor force or women workforce not been part of the economy, and what are the reasons, and why this 15,000 is going to come in handy for that? That explanation is missing in general from all political parties. And it is getting glaringly bad because you look at every single state, there is only competitive freebies. There is just no policy making. Look at American elections. You come out with any promise, you have to tell them that how is the budget balancing out? The assets and the liabilities have to be called out. Otherwise, everybody can promise the moon and then there is no end to it. So my point
Absolutely.
is, political parties have to be responsible in this day and age where information and voters are eager to listen into information and figure out how my politician is going to actually fund it. Or is it just a poll promise which carries no relevance post-elections? I think this is where more mature politics is the need of the hour.
Right, absolutely. And Rajat, what is the likelihood that freebies that are being announced now, and if they are implemented, what is the likelihood that they would be rolled back after whatever stated objective is achieved? Has that ever happened?
So I've served as advisor to 3 chief ministers, and I can tell you, and these are 3 different states. Every single state reels with the pressure that, closer to the time when the salaries have to be disbursed, they look up to the RBI to lift the limit of, open market lending, etc. And that's where, the RBI pushback comes, and most of these state governments feel the pinch. Because then there are government employees who are waiting for salaries. If it is festive time, they don't get salaries in time. Himachal Pradesh is yet another example which was really reeling under the pressure of debt ceiling being touched, and RBI repeatedly saying that no more, you cannot borrow anymore. And then they had to look up to the center or either redirect funds here and there. Poll promises, when the rubber hits the road, most of these fall flat. And then around the time of election, they are rekindled somehow. You try and say that, yes, I'm meeting those poll promises by ensuring that your revenue expenditure in the last election year goes off the charts. That's how political parties do it. Or hope that the growth numbers are eventually going to create enough amount of surplus revenue that down the road, they will be able to meet these promises. If not today, then at least 3 years from now. But by then, you can fairly imagine that none of these poll promises see the light of the day in an immediate or a time-bound manner.
Right. Amitabh, would you like to add to that? Because in Rajasthan, and we are seeing this in several Congress-run states, there is a lot of talk about going back to the old pension scheme, which is going to be fiscally disastrous. After a lot of debate and discussion, the new pension scheme was devised, but now we are seeing a lot of that reform being done away with and going back to OPS. So, you know, how do you explain this? How do you explain going back to a fiscal practice that was not working, that was proven to be a fiscally disastrous? And most Congress-run states are going back to it, clearly to appease the voters, and you might say there's a demand, but is it all right? I mean, at what point does the government draw the line that, okay, I'm going to give in to this demand and I'm going to hold back to this because it's actually not good?
Yeah, so, you know, there are different views on OPS, but I've taken part in a few of the state manifesto processes, and the demand for this across the country has been very strong. There's been a lot of pressure for this, a lot of lobbying and mobilization. So there is a perceived requirement, but it can be expensive. Although in the future, it's to some extent the buck is being passed on to future budgets. But there's another point I'd like to make. A lot of the pressure on state governments to step in is in part because the central government, which has many more resources, hasn't quite stepped in the way we believe it should. For instance, if you know, in the last few years, the focus of the central government, the Modi government, has been on supply side economics. And as the opposition Congress party has been arguing consistently that we need more demand side measures. Now imagine if a Nyaya type of program, a well thought through, a well-designed Nyaya program was in place, then the demands on state governments for these kinds of transfers would have been much lower. So to some extent, states are being forced to step in because central government hasn't stepped into these spaces and taken care of these demands. So I think that's something we should also keep in mind.
All right, I think we are out of time, and clearly there are no conclusions to this, but let me just give each one of you, a couple of minutes on your closing remarks. Where do we go from here? We have polling tomorrow in Rajasthan. We have general elections next year. It's almost like the ball, the freebie ball has been let loose, and it's probably going to get worse than it gets better. Rajat.
I agree. If you leave it to these political parties in general, you're not going to expect any solutions. I am pessimistic about it because I've seen elections far too close. When getting closer to the elections, the only intent of any of the political parties is just to win by hook or by crook. Largely the crook takes over, and you see all kinds of policy measures which are grossly and grotesquely irresponsible take front seat, and all kind of prudence takes back seat. All kind of public policy designs, assessments, all of that, which largely you would want ideally your politician to spend time on, they don't care. So I don't see any hope coming in from political parties. It is either the Election Commission or the Supreme Court which will have to step in. They'll have to step in and tell the political parties that for whatever promise you come up with, give us a number. How much is it going to cost and how you're going to finance it in a time-bound manner with a reasonable set of assumptions. You asked right now from the Congress fellow panelists that how much are your Rajasthan promises going to cost you? He didn't have a number because no political party does those calculations. And this is where the root cause of the problem is. Thank you.
Right, absolutely. Amitabh, would you like to come in here?
Yeah,
will the Congress party up these list of promises in the next general election?
Well, I think I don't want to speculate what the general election manifesto will have. I will say that our previous manifesto was not fiscally responsible in any way. But the point I want to make is let's not confuse the symptoms for the problem. I talked about the K-shaped recovery in the economy. Inequality is a very powerful underlying driver of these kinds of demands. And just to give you an example, between 2004-5 and 17-18, the number of people who are agricultural laborers, the lowest level quality employment, went down by 6.7 crores. Since then, it's gone up by 6 crores. So, we have a strange situation where we say our economy is growing, yet people are moving back into poorly paid agricultural jobs. So this is really underlining the fact that something's gone terribly wrong in our economy, and there's a large segment of people who are not taking part in the growth story. And this is where these demands are coming from. So until we tackle that underlying problem by having more balanced growth, we will continue to have these kinds of demands. These demands have gone up in recent years. I think all of us will agree that the kinds of demands that were coming from voters were not this focused on what you call freebies 10, 15 years ago. It's a new phenomenon, and it's being driven by an underlying process. We need to deal with that process, and then this can be taken care of.
Well, from my reporting, what I've learned is that ultimately what people of India want is good jobs and good opportunities, which comes with growth. It comes with fiscally responsible policies. It comes with investment. Thank you so much, Rajat, Sethi and Amitabh Dubey for joining us. Clearly, the voters need to realize that there are no free lunches. If a political party is promising to give you laptops and tablets for free, there are going to be cutbacks on some other public services, and voters need to decide very, very carefully on who they vote for and what they are voting for. Thank you so much for watching. We'll of course keep following this debate on freebies versus welfare. Thank you.